Hi, everyone. So I was watching the Joe Rogan interview with Dr. Peter McCullough, and two things stood out to me that I wanted to share. And one is that he spoke about the fact that remdesivir, which is a drug that is being forced on patients in hospitals now for COVID, that are killing a number of patients as well, forcing them to, many patients' families, to take them to court to force them to use other drugs like ivermectin. So remdesivir is patented by the CCP. So every time it's very, very expensive. So every time all the money being made of people dying from this drug, China is making money from it. So that's one thing. And number two, that the fraudulent study published by the Lancet that was demonized hydroxychloroquine, which was another drug that could have been used very early to save people. The people at Harvard is very compromised by the Chinese Communist Party, and that could also be contributed. They could have. I don't have proof that they directly did it, but there's a heavy influence there of the CCP on Harvard. And Harvard, somebody at Harvard was responsible for the fraudulent study that was published in the Lancet that caused the FDA to ban the use of hydroxychloroquine, killing even more people.
Remdesivir was basically a repurposed failed Ebola drug. And it does have intellectual property ties through Gilead back to the Chinese. So the Chinese originally were collaborating with us very tightly. I have tons of emails from the Chinese. They were trying to alert us what's going on with COVID-19. Remdesivir came up. It's a polymerase inhibitor. As a general, I told you hydroxychloroquine has three mechanisms of action. You reviewed previously ivermectin, which also has three separate mechanisms of action. Remdesivir is a one-horse show. It's a single mechanism of action. It inhibits the polymerase, and it unfortunately, as the data have borne out, it's given far too late in the illness, right? So the polymerase is active early in viral replication. So if you gave it on day 1, it may actually do something. But if you give it on day 14, by the time someone comes in the hospital, the virus is done replicating at that point in time. And then all it can do is offer toxicity. And you're right, it's a 5-day infusion of remdesivir. Early on, we heard about the hepatic toxicity. In my experience, I could never get a patient through 5 days of therapy because the liver function test, the AST and ALT, would skyrocket. Now it's become clear it's been associated with acute kidney injury. And the kidney injury is not tolerated in COVID-19 because any retention of fluid makes the oxygen saturation in the lungs far worse.
So here's a Forbes article from January 31st, 2021, The Strange Story of Remdesivir, a COVID drug that doesn't work. The drug is administered over 5 or 10 days, a 5-day course. A treatment costs around $2,600. So for a hospital with hundreds of COVID patients, that amount to millions of dollars for one antiviral. In the Defender, there's a story from November 24th, 2021. Top ICU doctor suspended after suing hospital for banning life-saving COVID treatments. In an exclusive interview, Dr. Paul Marik said patients are dying, quote, unnecessarily and unlawfully because the hospital where he is a director of the ICU prioritizes expensive drugs like remdesivir while banning more effective and less costly treatments. Dr. Marik filed his lawsuit against Centura on November 9th, 2021, arguing the organization is endangering the lives of COVID patients, preventing him from his treatment protocol, which he says has reduced mortality rates. The lawsuit alleges that Centura's ban, the hospital, on the use of certain therapies against COVID violates U.S. and Virginia medical laws and the concept of informed consent, where patients have the right to receive information and ask questions about recommended treatments so they can make well-considered decisions. Marik called the hospital's ban on administering certain medicines for COVID patients unprecedented and cruel during his November 18th testimony, requesting a preliminary injunction to lift the ban. In the motion, Dr. Marik said patients are dying unnecessarily and unlawfully because Centura Healthcare is preventing terminally ill COVID patients from exercising their right to choose to receive safe and potentially life-saving treatment determined to be appropriate for them by an attending physician. In an interview with the Defender, Marek said the hospital is prohibiting the use of COVID protocols he calls Math Plus. The protocol includes treating COVID patients with many drugs approved by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which has determined the drugs are safe and effective. Instead, according to the lawsuit, Centara recommends hospitals use toxic drugs like remdesivir, an expensive medication associated with severe side effects, because the hospital receives a bonus each time doctors prescribe it. So here we have, and this has been reported all over, that hospitals and doctors are using remdesivir, which is patented by Fauci, Gilead, and the Chinese Communist Party. This article was published in September 21st, 2021, The Fraudulent Dr. Fauci and the Remdesivir Scam. In February 2020, the state-run Chinese lab sought a patent on the use of remdesivir to treat coronavirus. So this is from the Wuhan Institute, which Fauci worked very closely with. And of course, they're associated with the Chinese Communist Party, or the CCP. So after the CCP and Fauci recommended the use of remdesivir, the U.S. secured the world's supply and began treating Americans with it. And patients immediately began suffering kidney failure, which was then blamed on COVID-19, even though studies by the manufacturer show remdesivir caused it in 23%, even after only a few days. They're saying when the kidneys fail, the lungs fill with liquid, thousands have died. And if you read the fine print, this was all expected, and Fauci knew it. So Gilead Sciences, which works with the CCP and Fauci in making this drug, biblically named cash register of pharma community with a long history and who make remdesivir, said it will charge the U.S. government $390 per vial for its drug. That's over $2,300 for a typical 5-day treatment per person. The longer 10-day treatment course would cost governments $4,290 a patient. So this drug is very expensive. Doctors are being given bonuses, and the money goes to Gilead, Fauci, and the Chinese Communist Party. So if that's not all sickening enough, how they're making Fauci knows the damage being caused, people are dying, they're trying to have to go to court, trying to get alternative treatments that instead of remdesivir is killing their family members. Then you have the fact that there was, for the first time ever, I believe, Lancet published a completely fraudulent paper from a person at Harvard utilizing information from some, fly-by-night created fraudulent company, and Dr. McCullough talks about it here.
When there was a fraud, 5 days do I do? 10 days do I do? Every other day? I don't know. We use the drugs, and I'm comfortable with that. I can live with ambiguity in the setting of a crisis. The point is, these are very safe and effective drugs. They're useful drugs. I saw a trend. You've asked me 3 times, so I'm going to answer it. I saw a trend starting in April, May, and June, where it became clear that anything we were doing to try to help patients with early treatment was receiving a chill. And the chill was coming through academic institutions, through the medical literature. I think the capper was in June when there was a fraudulent paper published in Lancet on hydroxychloroquine between Harvard and a company called Surgisphere. And this never happens. Lancet's like the New England Journal of Medicine of the world. I'm the editor of a major journal. I run a journal. I know what it takes. There are editors, associate editors, reviewers. There is pinpoint accuracy. We check references. We check plagiarism. Believe me, it's a tight world out there. They basically published a fraudulent paper on hydroxychloroquine in Lancet in 2020, around June. And they let it hang up there for 2 weeks, stating that hydroxychloroquine was associated with harm when used in patients with COVID-19 as an admission.
Who made this study?
It was between one investigator was at Harvard, and it was by a company called Surgisphere that nobody knew what this company was. It turned out to be a company that literally just dissolved or went away without anybody understanding.
So it was a company that was created specifically to do this?
Don't know. I don't know. All I can tell you is I looked at the data, Joe, and they had tens of thousands of people they claimed were hospitalized with COVID-19 fairly early in the pandemic. The average age of these people hospitalized was in the low 40s. I looked at this paper in 2 seconds. I go, this doesn't make sense. We were hospitalizing people in their 80s, not in their 40s. And so to me, it didn't look right. And then people started writing Lancet saying, listen, this doesn't look real. And they started receiving tons of emails. And then Lancet basically retracted it and said, we retract it. No apologies, no explanation. With that. And that occurred right before the FDA said, don't use hydroxychloroquine. It almost looked like it was a step to basically try to bury hydroxychloroquine as a therapy. But
Here is the retracted paper from the Lancet about hydroxychloroquine that banned it for use everywhere. With this company, Surgisphere, which has apparently disappeared now. It says funding by William Harvey, Distinguished Chair in Advanced Cardiovascular Medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. The names on the paper are Professor Mandeep Mehra and Professor Frank Ruchiska and Amit Patel and Sapan Desai. So Mandeep Mehra works at Brigham Women's Hospital and Vascular Center at Harvard Medical School. Now, I don't know if that professor at Harvard in particular was connected with the CCP, but Harvard and Yale are known, as well as other schools, but particularly Harvard, for having students from high-level Chinese Communist Party families graduate. And many of the professors at Harvard have gotten in trouble for not disclosing millions in funding that they've received directly from the Chinese Talons program. And here's one example, as many articles. Harvard, Yale, in February 2020, they were under investigation for $375 million in secret funding from China and Saudi Arabia.